Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
GSMC Travel Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and one of the favorite things that Staci and I often talk about on this podcast are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And so I wanted to revisit some of those discussions that we had, because I think this is a fascinating these sites are fascinating, and the fact that they exist is fascinating. The fact that there are so many of them is wonderful. A bucket list could be, just visiting all of them in the world. As of July of this year, 2019, there were 1,121 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, I believe I read recently, which is just amazing. So, what is a World Heritage Site? We probably talked about this a little bit at some point when we first started talking about them, but a UNESCO World Heritage Site is a landmark or area which is chosen by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Hence, UNESCO. Let me say that again. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So these are sites that have been chosen as having cultural, historical, scientific, or other form of significance. And a site is legally protected by international treaties. The sites are judged important to the collective interests of humanity. So to be selected, a World Heritage Site must be an already classified landmark, unique in some respect as a geographically and historically identifiable place having special cultural or physical significance. This could be an ancient ruin, a historical structure, building, city, complex, desert, forest, island, lake, monument, mountain, or wilderness area. So you've got a lot of options. It may signify a remarkable accomplishment of humanity and serve as evidence of our intellectual history on the planet. The sites are intended for practical conservation for posterity, which otherwise would be subject to risk from human or animal trespassing, unmonitored/uncontrolled/unrestricted access, or threat from local administrative negligence. They are demarcated by UNESCO as protected zones. And this list is maintained by the International World Heritage Program, administered by the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. Yeah, so I don't know. This is fascinating. It started in 1978 when the city of Quito earned the, is that Quito? Quito? That's terrible. I should know how to pronounce that. So 1978, the city earned the distinction of being the first city in the world to be declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And in that same year, Krakow in Poland was also named a World Heritage Site. And as I said, yes, there are 1,121 as of July 2019. Maybe that number has gone up. They exist across 167 countries. China and Italy both have 55 sites, which is the most, followed by Spain with 48, Germany 46, France 45, India 38, and Mexico 35. So, as I said before, if you wanted to do a bucket list, that would be a pretty amazing list with 1,121 sites and more being added, of course, because I'm sure this isn't a static list. So for this episode, we are going to revisit 3 of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites that Staci and I spoke about, just because I find them fascinating and think that it would be fun to kind of group them together. So the first one, the first segment will be on the city of Quebec. or Quebec City, I should have said. And Old Quebec is actually the UNESCO World Heritage Site in this case. So let's go ahead and listen to that segment.
So the place I'd like to go in Canada, I mean, I kind of just want to take like a summer to explore Quebec, because again, Canada is a big, big place, and Quebec being the largest province is also a big, big place, but it's kind of spread out.
Right.
There's Montreal, which is, of course, the city, and everyone knows they speak French there, and that's where, you get like Cirque du Soleil. I remember watching a documentary for one of the Cirque du Soleil shows, and I knew in the back of my head, because the name is Cirque du Soleil, so you can hear it's in French, but it still threw me off to like watch them speaking in French all the time and have to be like reading the subtitles, even though I'm like, wait, but you're just in Canada.
Right.
Why do I speak English? I don't understand. Oh wait, that's right. You speak French there. And it just sounds so cool, even though,
I just love that some people want to spend a summer backpacking through Europe. You want to spend the entire summer in Quebec.
It's a large place to explore. It would probably take more than the summer to fully explore.
I'm sure,
that whole province. But if I had to choose a specific place, I'd want to go to Quebec City. And that's not just because it also has the name Quebec in it. Although that would be a very simple reason of, I'm going to Quebec, where Quebec City. I'm going to Quebec City in Quebec. Yes, just all the Quebecs. I'm going there. But no, that's not why. Quebec City has a lot of interesting things about it. There's Old Quebec, especially because, again, I like the idea of going to Europe without having to go to Europe. Oh, poor me. I need to work on that. I really do. But I think they maybe just changed this recently, but it did used to be that you didn't have to have a passport to go to Canada, right?
You do now, but you can have the card. You don't have to take your full passport. You can have the identification card for Canada and Mexico.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Well, if I had gone a little earlier, I wouldn't have needed my passport, which is great because my passport expired. So I'd be saved that whole hassle, which would definitely be required going anywhere in Europe. But in Old Quebec sort of feels like an old world French village. It's 400 years old, and you can sort of see it in the architecture and in the, the stone streets and all that. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's the only walled city north of Mexico.
Interesting.
Which, yeah.
Yeah, we don't really do walled cities here.
Yeah.
For people who may not be familiar with UNESCO World Heritage Sites, do you want to explain that a little more?
So, UNESCO World Heritage Sites, UNESCO is put on by the UN, right? That's what the UN part of UNESCO means.
I believe so.
It's them, certain, I don't think there's a specific number, but places around the world that are seen to be, historically or archaeologically important are marked as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and that gives them a bit of, protection from the forces of modernization.
So it's kind of like being, on the historical society's
something,
kind of, but on a global scale.
Right. Yeah. So you can't, just tear it down to build condominiums or whatever. Once it's on the World Heritage Site, that's a level of protection. And it also makes it a big tourist draw, which is part of that protection is, oh, hey, now you're on the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. That's a place I really need to go. And so it gives them a reason, most definitely not to tear these places down. Right. Because tourists want to come and see historical sites.
And I know that there were battles fought, before the American Revolution.
The French and Indian War.
Yeah, and so is that why Quebec is a walled city? Is part of that? I mean, I don't even know.
I don't know why Quebec City is a walled city. Like part of it, my simple brain just goes, oh, isn't that because it's French? But but like we have French places in America that were originally part of French colonies, and we don't have walled cities. So
New Orleans is not a walled city.
No. So I'm not actually sure why Quebec City is a walled city. But there is this beautiful hotel, the Chateau Frontenac. I completely apologize. I'm sure my French was absolutely horrible there.
You got Chateau right.
Chateau. Actually, I'm sure they're probably like, that's not how you pronounce it. I apologize. But anyway, Chateau Frontenac, sure, we'll go with that, was built in 1894, so it's now 125 years old. but it still welcomes guests. Mm-hmm. And I actually first saw this because it's, I believe, it is the most photographed hotel in the world.
Okay.
And I actually saw this in a drama.
We are going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. If you want to know more about that drama, we will not be talking about it when we come back because we're going to be moving on to a new UNESCO World Heritage Site. So if you are intrigued by Staci's story and didn't listen to this podcast originally, you'll want to go to episode 5, which of course is about Quebec. So when we come back, we will be moving to our next World Heritage Site, which is Angkor Archaeological Park. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Staci and I were talking about Old Quebec as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And as I mentioned, we are now going to move to a completely different continent. And we'll be talking about the Angkor Archaeological Park, which is a mouthful. But let's find out more about that.
Welcome back. You're listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast. And today we are talking about Siem Reap, Cambodia, which serves as a gateway town to Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom, which are very, very famous temples in Cambodia, possibly the most famous temples in Cambodia. And it's not that they're one single temple. There's thousands of temples in the Angkor Archaeological Park. So it's a set of temples, not just one specific one.
Which makes it an awesome destination because you're not just going for one temple. You can see lots of them.
Right. So, Angkor Archaeological Park was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1992. I believe we talked about UNESCO World Heritage Sites on our last episode.
Yes, we did. Which apparently now we are traveling in our imaginations to places that are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I'm okay with that.
Wasn't the main theme, but sure, yeah, no, that's part of the whole reason for UNESCO World Heritage Sites is places that people want to travel.
Yes.
So the temples, again, lots of temples, can be broadly categorized into 4 groups. So there's Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom. I'm not sure that pronunciation is correct, but that's what I'm going with. And those are sort of the main ones. They're the grand ones and the ancient capital next to it. So Angkor Wat is the temple and Angkor Thom is the capital. But then they also offer these circuits of temples as sort of like a tour like special. You can say there's the little circuit or the big circuit, and they actually have French names because Cambodia was once, a French
colony.
Property? Not quite, I mean. But, so they also, Le Petit Circuit.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever actually said that word in French.
Le Petit Circuit and the Grand Circuit. I apologize.
Spelled the exact same way as circuit. So
we did this.
Circuit.
We did this on the last one. I still can't speak French, even though it's a whole nother episode. But, the little circuit takes in the major sites to the east of Angkor Thom, and the big circuit takes in the major sites north and further out. And then there's also the Rololos group, which is 15 kilometers east from Siem Reap, as along the national highway. And then there are some even more outer-lying temples that are over 20 kilometers from Angkor Wat. So there's a lot of temples and various different ways to see which ones, depending on which ones you want to go to. But they are still used as temples.
Right.
So there are some, and these pictures are really wonderful, but you'll often see in pictures groups of Buddhist monks in front of the temples, even though some of them were originally Hindu, but that they are still used for Buddhist monks and for people to actually pray in.
Right.
And there are people who will offer you incense if you want to like help with the prayers or whatever, but that may actually be a scam. So that was one of the things in reading this that they said don't do, because if you take the incense, then they'll ask you for money for it afterwards.
But also, these are still temples where there are people using them as temples, as places of worship, which means you need to remember to be respectful. It's not just a tourist site where you can go and act any way you would like. You still need to be respectful of what's happening in that space.
Yes, and they actually do have a dress code. So both men and women have to have their shoulders and knees covered out of respect, but their head uncovered. So don't wear a hat inside the temple, but do make sure you are wearing, a shirt with sleeves. And even if you're wearing shorts, because it's be hot, make sure they're long shorts so that your knees are covered.
Right.
This is considered respectful. But most of the tourists tend to see the sunrise at Angkor Wat, which is, I've heard, just absolutely stunning. But that the temple itself is better viewed in like afternoon light.
Oh, okay.
So there's sort of a set routine where they see the sunrise, and then they go see other temples, and then they come back to Angkor Wat in the afternoon.
So Sarah and Staci's introvert traveling tip for the day is to go between sunrise and mid-afternoon. You might not see it in the best light, but there'll be fewer people.
I mean, it's hard to, you'll never not have people, because it's a very popular site, but to minimize the people in the foreign country you're traveling to.
Just trying to help you out there.
It's also helpful upon arriving in Siem Reap to find a good tuk-tuk driver. And there's actually a different name for this, but even Cambodians tend to use tuk-tuk, so we're going to call it that, which are these sort of not quite carriages attached to motorcycles.
Yeah.
It's motorized. What's the one where they run?
Oh, geez. Yeah.
That.
Yeah, that. Oh, seriously. It'll come to me probably like an hour after we're done with this podcast.
It is the motorized version of that. And finding a good one and relying on them for the duration of the trip can be very helpful. They will know a lot of the locations. They'll know the best ways to get there. And the prices are actually really, really cheap. It's usually about like $1 or $2, US dollars just to go like completely across town. It may go up if you have like a lot of people in your party. They say you can haggle, and that actually haggling is very common there, but I'm sort of like $1 or $2. You can have it.
I know, but haggling is part, it's not necessarily part of our culture, so it makes me feel uncomfortable, but it's actually accepted and kind of a sign of almost respect in some cultures.
Yes.
So, not my comfort zone, but.
Right. But, to make sure and find a good one, there are some that speak English pretty well, and more that's becoming the case because this is becoming such a touristy place. But there are others who will try and scam you, or they'll be part of there's a number of sort of scam setups in the town that you're supposed to be aware of. So especially to agree on a price beforehand.
Sure.
Because it will be really terrible if, you think it's whatever, and then you get there and then you're arguing about it. Even if it's just like $2, it's like that's gonna make it not feel as awesome.
Yes.
But they also say because these tuk-tuks are open, to be aware of your belongings, because there are a lot of people who sort of make their living riding around on motorbikes and just snatching things out of people's hands from tuk-tuks.
Oh, jeez. So, yeah, don't be taking pictures and selfies with your hand out. Keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times.
And all personal objects and your bag and your smartphone, and make sure, you've got a good hold on that and people can grab it easily.
But really, that's a good advice
Everywhere.
For traveling anywhere.
Yeah.
Don't just, you've got to be aware of your surroundings. You've got to be aware of your personal items. Don't just, stick your wallet in your back pocket. You got to be smart about these things.
But I think we'd probably not be so used to it, because if we're traveling somewhere, let's take a taxi, let's take a Uber, let's take a Lyft. Those are enclosed spaces. It would be very hard for someone to come up and grab my cell phone out of like a taxi.
Right.
But it's very easy to do in Siem Reap, so just to be aware of that. There are other things they talk about, like there's a baby milk scam. They definitely discourage giving money to children, even though you probably want to and you think it'll help. they also say that like this with this baby milk scam where a child will come up and say, oh, I need baby milk for a younger sibling or whatever. We don't have any milk. We don't have any formula. Right. Will you please go into the store and buy it? And you think, oh, that's better because at least I'm not giving them money, straight out. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes what will happen is when you're gone, they'll sell that back to the store and get the money that way. Or they have a thing going on with the store where they sell it back to the store and then they split the money 50-50. Huh. So you feel like you're helping, but you might not actually be. I didn't mean to be so down there. But just things to be aware of when you're traveling, because it is Siem Reap and the main tourist areas of Cambodia are, modernizing. You do have Pub Street and all that, but the rest of Cambodia is still rather rural and not, the same quality of living that we're used to here. So you do have some people, trying to make their way perhaps the only way they know how.
So if you are intrigued by that UNESCO World Heritage Site and want to hear the rest of that episode, that would be episode 6 of the GSMC Travel Podcast. When we come back, we'll be having our final UNESCO World Heritage Site segment of this episode, and that is Havana, Cuba. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Travel Podcast. As I said before the break, we are now on to our last segment and our final UNESCO World Heritage Site for this episode. So let's go ahead and turn to the discussion that Staci and I had about Havana, Cuba.
Welcome back. You're listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast. We will hopefully stay on topic this time.
Keep on target.
So target is right now Havana, which is the capital of Cuba, and Old Havana, which is kind of separate but kind of not, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And we talked about UNESCO's...
All of Old Havana, not just a specific spot?
The specific area called Old Havana is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But New Havana is not. Mm-hmm. But we had mentioned about... Is it UNESCO? Would UNESCO's be plural? UNESCO?
I think it would be UNESCO World Heritage Sites, plural. Yeah, that's the way I would say it. But I don't know. You could say UNESCO's and just make it up.
they just sound like, off-brand Oreos or something.
I was thinking Necco wafers. Okay, seriously.
Off topic. Man, we're gone. But anyways, so... Well, we mentioned earlier how Cuba seems very much sort of time capsule-y, and that's actually still the case, although as we get more and more people traveling there and things open up more, that may change. So if you're looking to go for that old time capsule thing, go as quickly as you can, because that possibly will change in the near future. But for example, like you mentioned, the really classic cars, which is something they're known for, and you can find those a lot actually, because the only cars that Cuban citizens can legally own are cars that were created and bought before 1959. All newer cars are owned by the government.
Interesting.
Which is like, wait, what? I'm a little cool on the one hand, because then you get these really cool looking old cars.
Right. And, people always complain that you can't do your own car work anymore because it's so complicated. Well, Cubans clearly can work on their own cars.
But at the same time, I can't believe nobody owns a car. Like, good Lord, that's older than my mother.
Well, you definitely know who works for the government.
Right? I mean, you've got a 98, RAV4 or whatever. Oh, government guy.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, even if you have a 1970s car.
Right.
I guess.
Because I guess, and I could be completely wrong here, but I guess Cuba does not have, national car manufacturers?
I don't believe so, but we could.
So all their cars have to be imported, and because Cuba is still a communist, socialist country, that, we don't support capitalism, so we only buy the cars when necessary, and so you can't buy a new car if you're not for the government, I guess. I'm trying to understand the logic there.
I guess that makes sense in a strange sort of, political system that I don't necessarily understand.
Yeah, definitely don't understand. But it's just like, why, clearly, at some point, I'm sure the government cars had to, break down or not be worth it anymore, and we're going to upgrade. What did you do with the 1968 whatever? Do you just scrap metal it, or you don't give it to the Cuban citizens? So
well, yeah, I don't know. But so many questions,
really,
and so many people that we don't have to ask.
Yes, sorry, but anyways, we could if we went there. We should. That's why we
should go just to
educational. That falls under the 12 categories. And educational about why you can't own a car.
I want to know what happens to the cars that are older than or newer than 1959.
This is educational and support for the Cuban people to own the not as nice newer cars. Seriously, just keep your old nice. Those are some really. Again, and I know it's always very typical to say, oh, they don't make things like they used to, but they really don't make cars like they used to.
But then that begs the question of, again, how do you get parts?
You make your own?
I guess.
Yeah, oh man, so many questions now.
Duct tape, chewing gum, WD-40?
Or you just, you make it shine really nice and then have it be pulled by a horse? There was something that did that, and I think it was probably a movie, and now I'm completely blanking on what it was, where it was the car looks really nice, but won't run. So.
And we're just going to pull it with a horse. Okay.
Isn't that what cars are for? Isn't that how you use them? Horseless carriage, but we're really actually going to add a horse to my horseless carriage?
Carriage pulled by a horse.
Oh, man. Silly.
I swear we're not drinking.
But anyways, so one of the things that I'd be interested in, besides my whole, let me pretend I've traveled back in time to the 50s, 60s, what have you, is that for most people when they travel to Cuba just in general, but to Havana specifically, don't really stay in hotels. And I'm not actually sure there's that many hotels or hotels at all. But they tend to stay in these things called Casa Particular.
Okay.
Casa Particulars, I guess, if it was plural. Which are sort of private homes, but some of them have a license, and then some of them operate without a license, have the right to host people for money, I guess. So sort of like individual home bed and breakfasts.
So kind of like Airbnb before Airbnb
before
existed?
Airbnb, kinda, yeah. But you do generally get your meals there, and you can tell just immediately whether or not it's got a legal license, because the license is very particular looking. It's blue and white, and you could tell just from the street, okay, that one totally can bring me in. That guy that's, saying, hey, come stay here, probably not, because I don't see a license on his door. So it's allowed. Again, I don't understand communist countries, period, where it's like you're communist, but you have private industry and markets and people earn money. Yeah, I forgot everything that I supposedly learned about communism in school. We went over it just to know that it happened, and we had the Cold War, and then moved on.
And then they made you read Animal Farm, and yeah.
Actually, no.
Really?
Yeah, I did not read Animal Farm until a year ago.
Oh, wow.
What is education coming to?
You should know more about communism. It's only been a year since you read Animal Farm.
That didn't make sense either. And Animal Farm is a critique. We're so off.
Yeah.
But anyways, so Casa Particulars, because they're, private homes where you're staying with the family and sort of probably in the best of them feeling like part of the family, it sort of really does allow you to feel like you've been transported to this other world and you're not just a tourist, which you, if you are an American citizen, couldn't be anyways, because that's not one of the categories. And so you're there almost like you've stepped back in time. Mm-hmm. And I'm living in this old Cuban house, and traveling in old Cuban cars and going to old Havana, and just like, what year is it? I don't even know. And I think actually, even for that, you can't use your cell phone in most places. That there's a lot of places that definitely don't have Wi-Fi.
Sure.
And also a good number of places I think don't even have cell phone coverage. So you really do feel like, I think I've stepped through a wormhole almost. Like, I don't know what year I'm in anymore.
Yes.
But this makes it a really good romantic destination.
I was just reading about romantic destinations, actually.
And somehow this always comes up in these episodes with me and my imaginary lovers.
Do you have an imaginary Cuban lover now?
I don't. Maybe I'll just have to take my imaginary Quebecois lover and go to Cuba. He can get it easy. I don't think Canada has the problem we have with Cuba. So maybe
it's not your Italian lover, it's the Quebecois that you're taking?
He's closer. Oh man, we're so silly today. But because it's got this old style thing and it's not so beset with the newer things that you see in other touristy places, it's really nice to just sort of stroll around and to look at different things and to, admire the older architecture. There's a place in Old Havana that I'm completely blanking on now, where the wall is like partly made of old bathtubs.
Oh, interesting.
Which looks so cool. And I'm like, I would definitely just want to stroll along hand in hand, and they've got like writing in them, and just take the time to read what's going on in the different writing in these bathtubs. And of course, because it's Cuba, and you've got the salsa music and dancing, and it's just like me and my imaginary Quebecois lover.
Right, doing a little. Never mind. I was going to say Dirty Dancing Havana Nights, and it was bad all the way around. It was just a bad pun. I do apologize.
Oh man. We're
time for a break.
It is, yeah. We are still too silly, so we're going to take another short break.
Actually, we're just going to wrap up this episode, although one thing that I always enjoyed about Staci was the silliness. She and I had we just would giggle a lot in the studio, so I enjoyed it. Hopefully it's something that listeners enjoy as well. Who knows? At any rate, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the GSMC Travel Podcast. If you are interested in UNESCO World Heritage Sites, you should definitely do more research. I know I plan to, and I have a feeling that they're going to make more appearances on the podcast going forward. If you are a fan of this podcast, we would appreciate it if you would do all those wonderful things that help us out, like following us on social media, sharing our podcasts, subscribing to them, and giving us a nice review. You can just give us 5 stars. You don't have to leave us a written review, although a written review would be great. But please leave us a nice review, and that would be wonderful. Hope you are having a wonderful weekend and that you are not too full of your Thanksgiving turkey. But if you are, just go ahead and listen to more podcasts while you digest. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on the GSMC Travel Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.